up, guys? Welcome to the JustPearlyThings YouTube channel and welcome to the Sit Down. Today, I have a special guest. Welcome to the show, Shaw. So I invited Shaw on the show today because you were in my comments, or maybe I saw your video. I think you reacted to something of mine or whatever.
I made a video where it was reacting to kind of whatever podcast and Fresh and Fit having a kind of beef, and you commented on that video. So that's how we kind of first
Okay.
got introduced, I think.
I don't remember exactly, but I just remember you said you worked at a child support office.
Yeah, I worked at the Department of Child Support Services for 5 years, and that was here in Sacramento, California. And I was a child support officer, so I started off as a level 1, and then I became a level 2, and then after a little bit more, I got promoted to a level 3, and I became a trainer. So, at the agency, we're the guys who are starting, lawsuits basically on the state's behalf in order to get child support to establish paternity. I would do the cotton swabs in people's cheeks for the DNA tests, all that kind of fun stuff.
Really? So wait, so you would be the person that the guy would go to the state and say, "This isn't my kid."
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
he would sue the state.
Well, usually when that happened, we were suing him first, right? Because usually let's say you have a mom and you have a child, and the child's born out of wedlock, and nobody was at the hospital during this kid's birth. So I'll tell you later about declaration of paternity, voluntary declaration of paternity, or no birth certificate signed by dad. And typically, a lot of our cases were welfare cases. So mom and this kid, go on welfare. Our agency gets a task from the welfare office, and, we do what we do, and we send out a lawsuit. This guy gets served, and we're like, hey, we're suing you to establish paternity and also a child support amount so we can send money home to this kid, basically.
And how
So
old?
they'd come in after they were served and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not the dad. And, I'd run them through the process then.
And would you take mostly cases like that, or would it be a mix?
I think when I was last there, it was close to about 50 to 60% were welfare cases. So one thing that people have to understand is the entire federal child support program is kind of inextricably linked with the welfare program. And it was really because of the rise in welfare cases that the entire child support program was created in the first place in 1975. So, what you had basically after World War II, a lot of guys died on the battlefield and they left widows and orphans. Well, widows and their children. And somebody needed to take care of them. So at that time, the welfare program was created as an expansion of the Social Security program. So it became a Title 4A that gave us welfare. And it was mainly for these widows and their children. By the time the 70s rolled around, they looked at the welfare caseload, and the majority of them were not widows.
Mhm.
The fathers were, in fact, still alive. And it was a problem because it was costing a lot of money. So Congress is like, what are we going to do about this? Kids are being born out of wedlock like never before. The dads are still around. They're not living together, whatever, and they're all living off welfare. What do we do? So they created child support as a kind of enforcement arm to go out there and recoup the tax dollars that were being expended as welfare. So in 1975, the child support program was born, and states adopted that. Basically, if a state wants to have a welfare program, if they want to get federal welfare funds, they have to have a child support program at the same time. And those two kind of interplay with each other. It's interesting. So there's a carrot and stick approach there.
So basically, the child support office and the welfare office are linked, is what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, child support policy is completely born out of welfare policy, basically.
Because they figured out that all of these women on welfare had a dad that was still alive and that they could charge
Yes.
him basically.
Exactly. Around that time, there was a lot of debate over this. They were trying to figure out what to do because the data had come back, and they're like, okay, these aren't widows with women who lost their husband. They're women having children out of wedlock. That's where you got the term welfare queen. So welfare queen and deadbeat dad started to become popular terms around
Welfare
this time.
queen.
And there were some different ideas thrown about that time. There was one called the Sugarman proposal. And basically, it was two guys. I can't remember Sugarman's first name, but it was Sugarman and then I think Erwin Garfinkel. And they basically proposed, let's expand Social Security. And what we'll do is we'll basically charge everybody through their wages as an insurance if they become a non-custodial parent later. So they would expand Social Security. Everybody gets taxed a little bit more. And if someday in the future somebody has a kid out of wedlock and that kid needs help, they would be able to tap into the Social Security fund. The government really didn't like that. Both sides were like, screw you, let's go after the deadbeat dad. Okay. So
Right.
they decided to then create the child support enforcement program. And when it started out, it was just for 4D. 4D is the Social Security 4D is the child support federal program. It started out only working cases from the 4A program. So if the mom was on, well, if the child was on welfare, then the public child support agency would only focus on those welfare cases. But I think it was in 84, if I remember correctly, that it started to expand basically. And what the child support system started doing was advertising its services to non-welfare families, non-welfare moms. And the reasoning behind that, they were receiving more funding from the federal government. It was to say, there are families right on the line here and they might be on welfare sooner. So if we can get them child support faster, it should hopefully keep them off of it.
And I'm assuming it was a business too, so they would make more money in some way the more women were on welfare, or no?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, the way the funding works ultimately is based off of performance measures. So, at that time, you had a lot of kids being born out of wedlock, and paternity was mostly established through marriage. So I think even California in like the late 1800s, part of the code was any issue of your wife, you are presumed to be the father. So there's something called presumption of paternity when it comes to marriage. That's a very specific legal term. And keep in mind, this has nothing to do with biological paternity. One thing that I want people to know is like genetic tests weren't a thing till the mid 90s. So you have years and years and years.
It was that late? I didn't realize that was such a new invention.
That's the thing. And genetic testing was like a nuclear bomb in this game. You know what I mean? Because before that, what you had blood tests, I think in the 70s and 80s, but blood tests were better for excluding someone as the father. So mom would say, it might be this guy, it might be this guy, it might be this guy. They would do blood tests. It wouldn't exactly point who the dad was, but it would say it's definitely not this person, it's definitely not this person. This guy's left, it's probably him. But we have years and years and years and years of case law that establish paternity based off of a functional relationship with the child, which is very different than a biological relationship with the child. So when it comes to things like custody, this starts to be a problem because the functional relationship matters more in getting custody, where when it comes to child support, which is very specifically about getting welfare money back, biological paternity starts to be used, and it's more about saying, you're the dad, pay us. It's not about you're the dad, here, have a relationship with your child. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that there's this overall theme of private family law and public family law. And for the longest time in human history, private family law and public family law were separated. There was a barrier there. Most kids were born within a marriage. It was, I think in the 50s, only 5% of children were born outside of marriage. And, if you guys were going to get divorced, which honestly was also relatively rare back then, especially with at-fault divorce, you would go to, a judge, and a judge is going to make these decisions. Paternity wasn't an issue, first of all, because genetic tests weren't really there to give definitive proof one way or another. They did have paternity trials, and those were very tough, but you were going to be seen by a judge, and they were going to make those decisions, and the judges had the dexterity to make very specific decisions for your specific case. As the child support system began to expand, especially in the mid-90s, it got so powerful that it basically bullied its way into the private family law system. And that's why nowadays you have a lot of issues where men are struggling with this system, because the public family law system will come in and it'll cause problems on the private side. And I know that's a lot I just threw at you.
So wait, could you explain more the private versus public? So
sure.
Do you mean,
Sure.
okay, what child support's separate from family court? Like family court will decide how much I don't know if they decide, at least in the UK, from what I understand, like the people I've talked to here, the child, like you go to family court and then I don't know if the judge says how much you make, but they'll decide if the guy is on child support or not. And then they go to, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a third party office. Is that?
Sure. Well, I could tell you, and how it works in the US specifically is you have your family law courts, right?
Okay.
And the family law courts basically envelope everything. A family law court can decide on marriage, divorce, they can decide on paternity, they can decide on child and spousal support, division of assets, all of these things. Okay. And that's in California, that's very specifically called family law. Okay. Then you have family support court. Family support court is the public child support system court, which is limited to only deciding on child support, child care and health insurance for the kid. And it's very specifically for that. Custody is firmly lodged in the private family law court, where child support court has no bearing on that. Now, what's what's important to understand is that private family law court can determine child support amounts, but what'll end up happening is, a long time ago, that was more up to the judge. There was more dexterity. As the public family law system grew, he started to get these things called guidelines or guideline calculators. You know what I mean? So if dad thinks maybe this amount's appropriate, mom can appeal to the public family law guideline calculator and say, I want guidelines. So her attorney is going to be like, no, we want guideline. Okay. Which is what the public family law calculator says that everybody is entitled to as a fair state sanctioned amount of child support income based off of mom and dad's incomes in the custody parenting timeshare. So just to give a little bit more background on that, stop me if it's too much, but basically, public family law is something that was essential to society, but it goes all the way back to like English common law and poor laws, very specifically, because you always had kids who maybe were born out of wedlock. We didn't know who the dad was. And you had people who were in poverty and basically needed help from society at large. Now, typically when you had that happening, society had laws that kind of infringe on a private citizen's rights because you are kind of, being a burden to society. So now government either has to come in there, maybe they have to take the child, put them in protective services, maybe they have to give welfare, all these kinds of things. So there are very specific laws that govern that, and for the most part, that wasn't that big of a part of society until you start seeing more and more and more and more of these kids being born out of wedlock. So that starts in the 60s. And by the time we get to, I think 75, it was at about 25%, if I have my memory right. And around now it's at about 45%, So a lot of these kids were availing, these mothers with these children are availing themselves of the welfare, public system. It's becoming a cost to the public. So they needed to expand the enforcement of the public family law system.
Basically to get the men to pay for it in a way. It's kind of like getting men to pay for welfare.
That's exactly what it is, because you're trying to get the money to recoup the government treasury because they're expending that out to the welfare. And there was a big change in the mid 90s. Basically what happened in the mid 90s was the program that was created way before was called AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. And in the mid 90s that changed to TANF. That's Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And from 1975 the Child Support Office is created, and from the mid 90s in this same bill that changed welfare, child support got beefed up. Okay. And I'm going to try to explain this as quickly as I can without going into a huge college lecture here. But basically what happened was, people were getting mad, politicians were angry, and they were just like, hey, these people are living off of welfare their whole lives. They're having more kids who then also live off welfare. The problem is getting worse. Child support, when it's created, is still kind of in its infancy and it's not that efficient. There's all these problems. A guy might be in Tennessee one day and then all of a sudden he's in California, and it was just not very efficient. And there was all that kind of grumbling in the air. And then in the mid 90s, during the Clinton administration, and even a little bit before that, I think they were debating how do we about welfare reform, basically. People on both sides are trying to figure out what to do. And after a lot of debating, they finally create this bill, which is the welfare reform of the mid 90s, also called Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity and Reconciliation Act. So we call that PERORA for short. That was 96. But
and is this just in California, or are these federal?
That's federal. That's from Congress.
Okay.
Yeah. And what that law did is that it put time limits for welfare recipients who are adults. So instead of a mom getting part of a grant for the entire, 18 years of her child's life, she times out at 2 years, but the child all the way up until they're 18 still gets
that would put more of an incentive for women to get child support, because the welfare stops, right?
The welfare stops for her specifically. She's just getting it for the child. So the reasoning back then was, if we limit the amount of welfare they're getting, it should incentivize them to, go get child support. Hopefully, at the time, they thought it would bring relations with the fathers and the child closer if he was paying more. We kind of don't know if that didn't exactly work. And then the other side of that was, if mom gets cut off of welfare, they had programs to get her to work. So that's how you start getting this strong and independent woman propaganda coming at you, because you had these people kind of sandbagging society, right? And how do we get them off of this program? How do we make them useful and economically useful.
Mhm.
And at the time, it was okay, we're going to beef up child support. And then we're also going to, obviously women can do whatever, anything a man can. Let's get these single moms working and get them off of child support so we can limit the tax dollars. But at the same time, there was a woman named Marilyn Ray Smith, and I think she was out of Delaware. She was a director of a child support agency. She was working closely with Congress, and she went to speak with them a few times. And her whole thing was that, hey, we're having trouble enforcing child support against these guys. And she believed that the child support system should be as strong as the IRS tax system. So she went in there and she's like, we want child support to be beefed up. We want child support to be given teeth and power as much as the IRS. Everybody knows the IRS is not who you mess with,
Mhm.
So a big part of this welfare reform bill in the mid 90s, Perora, was also child support reform. And that's when child support really got its teeth. And that's around the same time genetic testing started coming in. So you had huge changes to this space legally.
Have you ever heard of like gynocentrism.com? Have you ever been on that site?
I think I've heard of the site. I mean, I've heard of gynocentrism. I don't know if I've been to the website personally, but
Yeah,
go on.
he really smart guy. His name's Peter Wright, and he's like a historian, and he
Mhm.
studies gynocentrism. He was telling me that the courts have been stacked against men from way before the 1900s. Like this isn't new because society will always have a more gynocentric leaning. And there's like
Mhm.
writings from the 1800s of a guy being in, I don't know if it was family court back then or whatever it was, but he was saying like the girl was an opera singer and he was mad because he still had to take care of her. And so
I
it was
really
rare, but I've heard it was actually not as different as everyone says it was so different back then. And
Mhm.
I guess
That's a
his
great
point is
question.
that people are people. I don't know.
I know who Peter Wright is only from Twitter. I actually really like his Twitter posts, and I see
Really smart
that he
guy.
follows you.
Yeah.
He's a very smart guy. I like the stuff he posts because he'll go and dig up stuff from a long time ago, and it really shows the grounding of all this stuff. And I if I remember correctly, I think he kind of goes deep into chivalry's impact and romantic love's impact on the culture we have, very specifically. And I think there's a lot of merit to what he has to say. But when I look at the legal landscape, and I think he also talks about Coventry laws and all these kinds of
Mhm.
things. A husband's always responsible for a woman, even in her business dealings or whatever debts, all
Yeah.
these kinds of things. But, we had at fault divorce and vastly different divorce laws going all the way up until 1969, when that started to be changed in the US at least. And it's true. I think it was always that way, but men had more to gain from the deal than they do now.
Right.
Now it's more so just all of the financial responsibility with not a lot of the authority, basically none of the authority. And so he's right to go back that far and focus on that, but at the same time, the laws were nowhere near as,
It's worse
I don't want to use
now.
the word oppressive, but to what
Yeah.
they are now. You know what I mean?
So, but basically, this girl came in and wanted it to be as strong as the IRS system. And so
Yes, Marilyn Ray Smith.
that was when,
Yes.
because I think you can, I have to look through my notes, but I know you can lose, they can take the money straight from your bank account, I'm fairly sure.
Yeah,
And you
that's called
can,
the bank levy. We had a whole team over here that focused on bank levies at the
wow.
agency I worked at. I'll basically tell you, so and this was done in Perora. So she was, lobbying Congress, all this stuff. When the final bill came out, it expanded child support's reach. So you can do a lot of things. I mean, first of all, they created a national directory of new hires. So that means, a guy would be working here, they'd send a wage assignment, then he'd jump states. Now he's somewhere else. We don't know if he's working somewhere else. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to get the money. They would just leave. So what they did is they created a national directory of new hires, and every employer in the nation has to report as soon as they hire somebody and it gets into this database. Me over at child support, if I see a case that owes money, and I don't have to look for this, the system is going to blip this in. I'm going to get a task and it's going to say, there's a new employment record. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to see this guy just started employment at this company. I'm going to call that company and I'm going to say, hey, I have a wage assignment, start docking this guy's wages. And we also get the bank account information that the banks basically report to us. Also, they're required by law. It was the 1996 Perora
Mhm.
Act that required financial institutions to provide information to us. So if we see that, what we do is if we have an arrears amount, we will send them them a levy, notice, and they will take the money from the account, basically. And it got the power of this of the child support system got so big that it's like, if you pop up anywhere on the grid, we're going to see you. And a lot of people don't really understand how much access to data the child support system really has. Locating parents was a big thing, and that's one of the things that Congress took into account. So it's like they created a federal parent locator service. This is something a child support officer would reference, and they would, whatever information they have on someone, they'll give it to us. I could take just somebody's phone number. If the woman had a maybe a one night stand with the guy or something like that, she has his phone number, she doesn't know the guy's name, I can take that phone number and work backwards to get the guy's name, get his social security number, find out his addresses, and when I plug the social security number in, the whole system starts ramping up, and I get all of his income information from the however many years it's in there for, past addresses, relatives, all these kinds of things, any licenses that they might have. And you can see all this stuff, and you can use it as leverage to get these payments in there. Let me see, I can give you a list of stuff. So we have access to state and local tax and revenue records. We can see public utilities and television companies. That's since changed to internet service providers, so they have to provide information to us if we ask them to. We can see what financial institutions that are doing business in the state, if you got an account with them, any occupational and professional licenses. So that's a big one. If someone's not paying child support, like, we'll go after their bar license, we'll go after their general contractor's license, we'll go after their fishing license, their driver's license, and we'll suspend all that
Man can't
stuff.
even fish.
A man can't, I know, that one always kind of made me laugh. I was like, the fishing license, all right,
Like, you can't. He's like, let me just
Yeah.
go off to the woods so I don't have to deal with any of these people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the tentacles of the state
Wow.
are very powerful, and they go everywhere. So, big data was a thing here. So once all this stuff happened in the 90s, then, child support took off, basically, because now you had genetic tests. So you didn't have to go through these lengthy paternity trials where you needed people to come out and be like, yeah, I saw them at the Christmas party, they were together, he bought the kid a gift on the birthday, here's a birthday card that he did. It was just like, here's the genetic test, simple, fast, easy, you're the dad, let's start charging. Now, that's one thing, but the real problems come in when guys that aren't the biological dad, get charged, basically. And a lot of that has to do with the interplay between, this new radical revolution of genetic testing in the mid-90s and all the case law and legal framework that we have for what constitutes paternity prior, which mostly has to do with a functional relationship. And what the state is most concerned about is you'll see this thing about like the best interest of the child, and it used prior to like at fault, when it was at fault divorce, they're looking for who committed fault in the breach of the marriage contract, and whoever the injured party was, that could be the wife, that could be the husband. The way the court was going to determine who gets what and how this ends, more would be given to the injured party. See, so after you got no fault, a lot of these laws and stuff like that, they look at it as what's in the best interest of the child. You know what I mean? And if you've been holding out to be the dad, like let's say you're married, you did everything right, presumption of paternity is there because that's how we established paternity before. Your wife issues of child, the state sees you as the father, the marriage ends, let's say the kid's 5 now, the marriage ended after 7 years or something. There's pretty much nothing you can do to undo that. I mean, you're on the hook. If you find out she's like, screw you, the divorce is contentious, I cheated on you with my old high school boyfriend, I never loved you, all the great stuff. You take a private genetic test and you're like, this isn't my kid. You want to undo that, you're not going to be able to. If you look at California Family Code, it specifically limits it to an action needing to be filed and served by the time the child's age 2. So if the kid's, 5 at this time.
Wait, so if he doesn't get the paternity test before age 2, he's on child support for life?
Yeah, until the kid's emancipated. So if he does not file and serve her for a to contest paternity prior to the kid's 2nd birthday, this is California specifically, then yeah, that's the case. And that's the problem with the married guys, and then you have the unmarried guys, which is a different thing. But these trad cons and people like that are like, get married. But that's what comes in with that,
Wait, so okay, so they divorce at 7, and he goes, he can't claim the kid is not his now, or like the kid's 7.
So if he was married and that child was born within the marriage, there's a presumption of paternity there. It's a very specific legal term, but it means you're legally the father, right? And no, he can't. That's very specifically in the code for California, and the states do vary.
Right.
But for the most part, there's a federal act called the Uniform Parentage Act, and its suggestions are basically 2 years after the establishment of paternity. California is a little different because it says age 2 specifically for marriage, and it does vary from state to state. But the most important thing is about the relationship with the child. So even if you weren't exactly established, you could challenge it. It'll go to court. Like, let's say it's before the age of 2, right? You
Mhm.
find out that's not the case. It doesn't mean you can automatically undo paternity. It means you just have the right to challenge that. So it goes to court, and let's say, okay, the genetic test comes back. You guys are all sitting there, and you're not biologically the father. The court is still going to look at, what does life look at for this child? So
Oh,
who is
because
the
it's the
father?
best interest of the child.
It's
So it
going to be the
doesn't
best.
mean oh, because
Yes,
I've
yes. So
heard that with they'll punish the guys for being traditional too, because if they're with the kid less, then they don't get cut, right? They don't get custody because
yes,
if the
because in
guy's like working to provide for the family, then he doesn't get custody because technically the mom was with the kid more. But that's like what trad cons will tell you to do, you know. That's what.
Yeah, well, custody, if you read about the history of custody, it's largely based off of functional parentage, basically. So, genetic testing caused a problem for custody also, because when genetic testing became a thing, you started getting guys. You would maybe get the affair partner of some woman who's in her marriage, and this child comes out, it's really the affair partner. So the affair partner says, "Hey, I want custody of my child. It's mine biologically." And then they would then sue to try to get that. And this created a new phenomena. So it really needed to be spelled out, like, what's more important as far as custody goes? Is it functional parentage or is it biological parentage? And as it stands now, biological parentage takes a backseat and is only really important for who do we charge
Mm.
child support to. All right. Where custody has more to do with functional parentage. There's an interesting case also, I mean, where it went to the Supreme Court. I think it was Carol D. The child's name was Victoria D. I can't remember the other guy's name, but this was in the 80s, and I think it was out of California. And this one was really wiry because usually the court can be like, okay, who really has the relationship with the child? Who does the child know as dad? That's who we give custody to. But what happened in this case is that the mom was with the husband. They lived together for a couple years. Then they had a split up or whatever. I don't think they got formally divorced or not, but the dad went to New York for a bit. Mom and the affair partner were living together. So the child was also living around the affair partner for a couple years. Then mom broke it off with the affair partner and got back with the husband. And they're like, okay, we're just going to have our happy family living married, even though this kid's not biologically, of the husbands. And what happened is the affair partner was suing for custody because now he wants to see his child as an emotional relationship. And it went back and forth and went back and forth all through the, appeals process, all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it was, I believe, Justice Antonin Scalia at the time. I read his readings on this, but very specifically, they voted there to uphold the rights of the husband in this case because they wanted to protect marriage. And it's just like, in this case where it's very close, where both of these guys have a 50-50 kind of like they've had parenting time with this kid, we're going to uphold marriage here instead of, the sexual
Mhm.
immorality part of it. That was back then. But these laws are ever evolving. And California, for instance, you can have multiple parents of a child. I don't know if you knew that. Like, you can have 3 legal parents of a kid over here.
Multiple.
And that's been relatively new. Before I left, that was kind of becoming a thing. 2024, they just updated that a bit to adjust some of the family codes. So if you go in there, you can see judges now have the power to decide custody between multiple parents. And same thing for the child support calculator. You can see the language in there. But that's all kind of the groundwork for if polyamory really becomes a thing, then the courts can go in there and be like, hey, this is how we're splitting it up. You have custody, you get
Well,
custody, you
it
don't.
seems like it's going that way. I mean,
Yeah,
not that I'm happy
poly
about it. I'm just like looking at we're kind of in soft polyamory now when you think about it.
it's kind of de facto, but yeah, not overt. Like, no,
Yeah.
people probably don't want to admit that so much. There might situationships almost the term almost kind of begs to say it's polyamory, which is one thing. But the laws are changing to accommodate that. You know what I mean? So it's like, you have all this law going up till now, and it's yet to be seen. The multi-parent cases we we have now aren't really that. They're relatively rare, and they have more to do with things like technicalities. Like I can give you a case construct. There was a case, and I mean, this happened where there was two guys, and the guys were like in and out of prison. But what was funny, it was like they kept missing each other. So like one guy would be in prison, and the other guy would he'd be living with mom. Like one of these two guys was the dad, and then that guy would go to prison, and the other guy would get out, and he'd be living with mom.
Wow. She sounds like a
And
great gal.
yeah, well, and I mean, that's the kind of stuff I mean, you got two prison guys and you got, it's all kind of but what ended up happening is that somehow as a fluke, the child support agency ended up getting judgments against both of these guys. And that wasn't supposed to happen. It should have only been one, but that case went to court. One person was the father, the other guy wasn't. And eventually what happened is they even had to bring the kid in for this one. They usually don't have to do that, but the commissioner had to take this kid into the back chambers, and the kid asked the kid about the relationship with the parents, and both of these guys, and the kid was like, yeah, this one's uncle whoever and this one's dad, and whatever. So they just made both of those dads legal parents and have to both pay child support. So you have three legal parents. You can also, here's one for the passport bros. There is an update coming down the pipeline to those laws, and it's specifically for like the K1, K2 visas where you bring over a fiance or a spouse basically.
Okay.
And usually, like, let's say you have a woman in the Philippines and she has a kid there from a prior marriage, maybe two kids, whatever. Some guy, goes out there, meets her, whatever. He wants to bring her back to the United States, and he brings her over. And what happens is, okay, she wants to bring her kid over. So he sponsors the kid too. Prior to that, if those two get divorced or split up and she goes on welfare with the kid, who do you go after? Can you go after whoever the bio dad is in the Philippines? No, not really. So they go after the sponsor. They're going to be going after the sponsor. This is going to be the new update in the law. And
wow.
so then you will, and in order to get child support from somebody, you have to be a legal parent to those kids. So that's how you'll get three parents that way. But for the most part, these kinds of cases it's kind of as an example of how these laws kind of evolve. And then as we get into it later on to like where polyamory maybe becomes more popular, if that happens, they can look back at these case laws and be like, okay, there's precedent for this. You can have multiple parents with custody. You can have multiple parents paying child support if it's in the child's best interest.
So why don't they just go to biological? Wouldn't that make it more simple?
Well, again, this goes back to not having what was the norms of how the laws operated back then. Biology was, we didn't have the genetic testing, right? So we had to create our legal systems for, the thousands of years that we've been around based off of the functional parentage. But, what you can't just, because there's a lot of guys that are like, if I'm biologically the dad, I should be given 50-50 custody. And, I would hear that at the child support office. I had guys come in that we got a judgment against from child support, and they're paying now. And I'm like, hey, okay, there's a 5-year-old out here. You're the dad. You owe us, give us $800 a month. This is how you can pay, blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, how are you guys taking money from me? And I can't even see my kid. She won't let me see my kid. And child support's answer to that was, hey, there's nothing we can do about it. You want to go across the street to private family law. And, you might want to look at the self-help center over there and see if you can figure it out. See, that's private family law versus the public family law.
So
they're separate
because they do a judgment there, and then you guys calculate it basically.
Well, no, we do our own judgments just for child support. So we can do that. But we can only do it in a limited scope of just child support, health insurance for just the financial stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Just the providing and the provisioning for the kids. When it comes to custody never became part of public family law, because you got to remember, our office is about recouping these welfare dollars. That's what we're concerned with. Our performance measures are concerned with how many kids can we establish paternity for? How much money can we come to recoup for the welfare system? And when it comes to paternity, it's like, we don't have the biggest incentive to care about who the actual biological father is.
Right.
We need a father for the kid. Now, if we don't know, of course, we're going to go through the rigmarole of who the dad is, but that has to do more with who mom tells us. We have cases where mom tries to protect the real dad. We had a case where this mom gave us a man's information that she got from somewhere. I mean, she had social security number, she had everything. So we're like, okay, great. That's who she's saying. She's signing the paperwork saying, I'm saying this is the dad of this child, because she was on welfare. And we started a case against this guy, and we sued him. We put him through the whole rigmarole, and he's just like, why are you guys suing me? I never met this woman in my life. I don't know who this is. At a certain part of it, he was like, listen, I'm gay. I've never had sexual intercourse with a woman in my life. There's no way I'm the father. And the genetic test came back. He wasn't the dad. And finally, like when we had to put some pressure on the mom came clean and she was just like, okay, the real dad actually lives with me. And I gave you guys this fake identity to try to protect the dad. So there's all kinds of weird
But
things
can
you
a
see
woman,
out there.
couldn't she just not put him on child support?
If she is receiving welfare funds for the child, it's not her choice whether or not child support takes action.
Oh.
So
If she
there's a
gets
thing called
welfare from the state, she has
yes.
to put someone on child support.
When you sign up for welfare, one of the things is it's a specific term called assignment of support rights. So when you sign up for welfare, you are assigning your support rights to the county, and now it becomes the county's right to go after to the child support to reimburse the federal, the treasury. Basically, it becomes the state's concern at that point. Now, public family law has intruded into a private family deal, so you can see how all those pieces kind of interplay there. If
Okay.
she gets off of welfare, let's
Oh.
say she's on welfare
Yeah,
for a
take
year.
away welfare from women. Good luck. Yeah,
Well,
okay.
if it happens, then
Miracles happen, I guess. Sorry. Take
at
away
that
free
point,
things from women, never.
well, yeah, I mean that's going to be a challenge, especially as I kind of think about that too, and it seems like we're going more towards a I don't want to say, like, I guess socialist would be the word, but style of governance and programs there as we move further and further away from what it was. But going back, if she gets off welfare, the support rights are assigned back to the mom, so she can say, hey, close the case down against dad. I don't want to have a case open against them. It's actually causing a problem to our relationship, and I'd rather you guys close that down. And then dad would only be responsible to pay back the county what he owes, and then mom and dad can continue to take care of it. And that kind of brings in a whole other subject. There's actually a lot of literature and studies and papers written on this. Like, I guess one thing I want to say is that there are a lot of smart academic minds. I mean, we got Princeton and Columbia and all these people looking at this stuff, and they're trying to figure out what's best here. And a lot of the programs that we have now are created from scholars looking at this, working with politicians, trying to solve the problems that they had back then. But we got new problems now. Things have changed. Traditionalism's gone, all these kinds of things. And for a long time, we didn't have data on unmarried fathers and what the relationship between them and their children looked like. So after the 96, beefing up of child support, that was acknowledged that we didn't have that. I mean, we knew that, relation outcomes for children are better when they're in a intact family, with both parents. We knew that domestic violence and things are higher and unmarried parents. What we didn't have for that data was if between bio dad or just a social father, as they called it, someone who's not the kid's dad. But so they undertook a gigantic study called the Fragile Families Study. Basically, it's been since renamed in 2023. I don't think the name was politically correct. I think it's now called the Future Well-Being of Families Study or something like that. But Fragile Families is if you look that up, you'll find it. And basically what they did is they took about 4,200 kids born in hospitals in big cities, and they've been following these kids throughout their entire life from age 1 to age 2 to age 5 to age 10. The kids just turned 22, I think, last year, so they're not kids anymore. But the whole time they're looking at that and they're saying, okay, when is dad involved in the life? Okay, does dad pay mom for this? Is there domestic violence? They're going through and they're interviewing the parents of these children and all these kinds of things. And what they found out, there's a paper that's pretty interesting here. I actually have it up. It's called Questioning Child Support Enforcement Policy for Poor Families, and that's from Leslie Joan Harris. She's a pretty big name in this. So is like Sarah McLanahan, Aaron Garfinkel. Aaron Garfinkel and Sarah McLanahan were the two academics that started this gigantic study. And what they found is typically the father is involved, in an unmarried family. To help out and want to participate. And what this paper specifically says is it's asking, is the public child support enforcement system that we have, does it actually help or harm poor families? And if you read this paper, at the end of it, what you see is that in cases where the child support program is involved, the poor children actually get less money and less involvement from their fathers than if the child support program isn't involved.
Wow.
The mom gets more informal direct payments. The children have more time with the dads. But when the government gets involved, it actually makes it harder for poor families, which is ironic because this whole thing started because it's supposed to be helping well, it was to recoup welfare tax dollars, but it's also to be helping poor families. So, you have academic literature that shows these kinds of things. And, it's obviously something we know. The men know it. The grumblings are there on the internet. They know something is wrong. I think they have trouble putting it into words because, this is a gigantic rabbit hole when it comes to the laws. No one person can fully get their mind wrapped around, the intricacies of this entire system. It's like looking at, our legal system is so refined. It's like as sophisticated as the engineering on an iPhone or something. So looking under the hood here and trying to figure out what's going on is it's pretty
really
tough.
Confusing.
Yeah. It's really confusing. And, there's a lot of people like, we need to change the laws. And the answer is absolutely yes, we do. But the question tends to come up, okay, what laws do we change? Then you start looking at them.
I say
and it's
ban child support, but I don't know how easy that would be.
Well, again, it's tied to the welfare system, right? I personally believe child support should be curtailed. It's too powerful right now. I think there should be limits on the amount, like here's the problem. Like when it was just poor families dealing with the public laws, nobody cared because it wasn't that many of them. But as feminism and, out of wedlock births have increased and the culture has changed, they're able to exploit these public laws for their own gain. And now it's become a problem to where the public laws were just for the poor. It has now intruded into the middle class. It has now intruded into Tyrese Gibson's house, in a Hollywood celebrity. And that's a problem. You know what I mean? So they're able to leverage this against men. And the question is, okay, what do we do about it now? How do we change it? The things that, my personal axe to grind, like I guess my bigger axe would be paternity laws. That's the kind of stuff. I don't like paternity fraud. I don't like that when I see that. My smaller but also sharp axe to grind is spousal and child support. I think need to have caps that make sense to the economic area you're living in, because with no fault divorce, if you as a man are supposed to be the provider and you are successful and you have done a good job of being able to be a great provider, mom can walk away. This is the I'm not happy meme from Coach Greg Adams, and she can leave, and the law basically says you are entitled to his lifestyle. You can leave for no reason. If you look at the spousal support core, if you look at the family law code in California for spousal support, early on in there, one of the things the judge is going to take into account, what was the lifestyle, what are the people used to within the marriage. And so when it comes to awarding spousal support, then whatever lifestyle is there is fair game. Same thing with child support. If you look at the codes, it basically says,
and then it makes them a target, right?
It makes them, exactly. That's my biggest thing with it, because when you get into a lot of the conversation, a lot of it is about a high value man. Kevin Samuels made that popular. He was talking to women, and he was talking about high value man. There's a lot of self-improvement stuff going on. A lot of the other big podcasts, Andrew Tate, was this. I just watched I think it was a stream with those two, Andrew Tate and the Fresh and Fit guys. And towards the last half hour of that conversation, they talk about, self-improvement and getting to this place. Myron literally says being average isn't good enough anymore, which to me, you can stop right there. That just means traditionalism is gone. Because if you can't be average, like what was traditionalism ever for, if not for the common people? I would like to think. So if you can't be average anymore, traditionalism's gone.
Well, I don't think Myron says that traditionalism is here. I think he'd agree with you on that.
He would absolutely agree with me. But if we agree that being average isn't good enough, then when you look at going back to being traditional and not being a high value man, then that's not going to work. Andrew Tate, he is kind of emblematic of this entire phenomena. He has won in the material world. Like he beat everybody. He's got the Bugattis, this, that, everything. Now, even Andrew Tate has to jump ship because he needs to go somewhere where the jurisdiction is not as harsh against men in terms of family law and marriages. He's not starting a family in London or in the US. I wonder why. So it's like, you can beat the game. You know what I mean? And those guys still don't want to be having a family here, which to me signals that the problem is the law. Because right now, women are incentive to be, predators in that way. You can be high value, you can attract these women, but the minute you try to long-term invest into someone, you are now completely vulnerable to the system. So, people like Myron, I mean, I have his book right here, Why Women Deserve Less, or Andrew Tate, they will sell the self-improvement mantra as the long-term answer, but it's not. It's good in maximizing short-term options. But the minute you decide to fully invest in one of these, you are now subject
Yeah.
to what these laws are going to do to you.
And there's no way to avoid it if you have a kid. That's the
There's
like
no
you
way.
can yeah, because I talked to I don't know if you know lead attorney. Have you seen his stuff?
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
know
I
him.
spoke to him about this and he told me he didn't fear marriage. He said, "Look,
Mm,
I've been married. You can get a prenup that's pretty good. You can get a divorce,
mm,
whatever. What I
mm.
fear is children because when you have kids in this country, these kids are not yours." He's like, "I would get married again tomorrow. I'll do marriage," but he's told me that there's just no way unless you do surrogacy to have a child and it really belonged to you as a
I
man.
cannot stand surrogacy. I'm not saying he's wrong. That's another thing that it's just something that personally irks me. It's super weird.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Um,
weird too. But you know what's weird? It's
it's
going
cruel.
viral. It's going viral that a guy got a surrogacy thing. Like, but it's
Yeah, from
interesting.
someone in Mexico or
Yeah.
Brazil or
But
something.
what's interesting to me is there was such an outcry about it from the TradCon. But
Yeah.
women have been doing the same thing for like how
Yeah,
long? 30, 50? I don't know.
you can go on Reddit right now and look up a subreddit called Single Mothers by Choice. It is the craziest thing.
Yeah.
It's just
But
to me
one
it's so selfish.
But a
Like
guy
how
gets
can you
one
bring
but a guy gets one kid and everyone's freaking out. Now,
everyone's
I'm not
mad?
I agree with you. It's weird, but I'm like, I mean, women have been doing it for forever, you know.
I will rather have the dad in that case because I'm pretty sure the kid's going to have a better outcome in that way. I mean, it's funny because you can see, okay, who's the better parent? Which kids are going to get the better outcome? Is it being raised by a single mom or a single father? I
We
mean,
already know.
ideally it
A
should be two.
dad.
You
Dad.
already know.
So easy.
Yeah. So listen,
Like
and that's the thing. To me, it's just cruel if and I can tell you some funny cases that kind of like we had a case with two lesbians,
oh no.
and this kind of goes into the multi-parent thing, but they got a sperm donor and they didn't do it through